The goat would not stop pulling at the bandage, nor held its legs steady with both hands and wrapped the cloth tighter, talking softly the way her mother used to. "Hold still, you idiot. I'm trying to help you." The goat bleated and tried to kick. Nor finished the wrap anyway. She always finished. She was 14 years old. She lived on Dust Haven, a dry and wind-beaten colony world at the edge of known space. The air tasted like copper. The sky was the color of old rust. Nothing about the planet was beautiful, but it was home to about 4,000 humans who had come here to farm and mine and build something small and quiet far from Earth. Nor lived with her father, Halim, a crop engineer who spent most of his days coaxing stubborn plants to grow in alien soil. Her mother, Dina, had been a field medic. She died 2 years ago during a fever outbreak that swept through the colony. She left behind a worn leather medkit and a daughter who could not watch anything suffer without trying to fix it, nor carried that medkit everywhere. It was too big for her. She carried it anyway. She wiped the dust from her knees and let the goat limp away. Bray came running down the dirt path toward her, breathing hard, his face pale beneath the sunburn that never seemed to fade on this planet. Nor, come on." Hadley called everyone to the square. "What? Ships." The sensors picked up ships. A lot of them. Nor felt something cold settle in her stomach. She picked up the medkit and followed Bray. The colony square was just a flat stretch of packed dirt between the water tower and the grain storage building. Sergeant Hadley stood on an overturned crate, his gray hair blowing sideways in the wind. He was old and thick-bodied and had served in Earth's military decades ago, before retiring to the frontier. He was the closest thing Dusthaven had to a soldier. "Listen up," Hadley said. His voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. Long-range sensors picked up a fleet signature about 6 hours out. "We have confirmed the energy pattern. It is Dravani." The crowd went silent. They did not stay silent. Everyone on the frontier knew about the Dravani. They were a warrior species that had been conquering worlds for centuries. They were massive, reptilian, with gray-green scales and 4 arms. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They arrived, they claimed, and anything that resisted was removed. "We have no warships," Hadley continued. "No heavy weapons. No way to get a message to Earth in time for reinforcements. So here's what we are going to do. We're going underground. The old mining tunnels beneath the colony are deep enough and wide enough to hold everyone. We take food, water, medical supplies, and we go now." "And then what?" someone shouted from the crowd. Hadley looked at them for a long moment. "And then we survive as long as we can." The evacuation was fast and messy. Families grabbed what they could carry. Children cried. Fathers and mothers moved with tight faces and shaking hands. Nor helped carry crates of bandages and medicine into the tunnels. Bray stayed close to her, talking too fast the way he always did when he was scared. "Maybe they will not land," Bray said. "Maybe they're just passing through." Nor said nothing. She watched the sky. By late afternoon, the sky turned black. Not dark, not cloudy. Black. The ships came in so thick and so many that they blocked the sun. They were angular and sharp-edged, built like weapons themselves. Hundreds of them, descending in a slow and terrible formation. The ground shook as the largest vessels landed in a wide ring around the entire colony. Dust storms kicked up, so high that Nor could not see the horizon. She stood at the tunnel entrance and watched. Her father pulled at her arm. "Nor, come inside. Now." She did not move. She stared at the nearest ship. It was the size of a mountain. Its hull was scarred from battles she could not imagine. A ramp lowered from its belly, and figures began to march out. They were tall, at least 8 feet. Their scales caught the dim light. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. They moved in perfect formation, row after row after row, like the planet was already theirs. A sound tore across the colony. A voice, amplified to a volume that rattled the water tower and cracked a window in the grain building. It spoke in broken, grinding human language. "Humans of this world, you are now under the authority of the Dravani Dominion, 9th Conquest Fleet. Supreme Commander Rennick claims this ground. You will surrender all structures, all resources, and all persons. Resistance will be answered. This is your only notice. The voice stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Nora's father pulled her arm again. This time she let him. She turned and walked into the tunnel. The heavy door closed behind them. She heard the locks engage, one after another. In the darkness, surrounded by 4,000 frightened people, Nora sat against the cold stone wall and held her mother's medkit in her lap. Bray sat next to her. He was shaking. She put her hand on his shoulder, but said nothing because there was nothing to say. Above them, the Dravani spread across the colony like a tide rolling over sand. Nora closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She listened to the rumble of alien machines tearing apart the only home she had ever known, and she held the medkit tighter because it was the only thing left that still made sense. 3 days underground, and the tunnels already smelled like fear. It was not a smell anyone could name exactly, but Nor knew it. Sweat and stale air, and too many people in too small a space with too little hope. Children whimpered in the dark corners. Adults whispered in tight circles. Sergeant Hadley moved between groups with a calm face that fooled nobody. Nor kept busy. She helped bandage a man who had cut his arm on a broken support beam. She held a baby while its mother slept for the first time in 2 days. She counted and recounted the medical supplies and realized they were already running low on antiseptic and clean wraps. "We need more from the clinic," she told Hadley. He shook his head. "The surface is occupied. Dravani patrols everywhere. Nobody goes up. The clinic has a full emergency locker. Enough supplies for weeks. If we do not get them, people down here will start getting infections from every small cut. And if you get caught up there, you get taken or worse." The answer is no. Nur did not argue. She waited until Hadley moved on. Then she found the collapsed ventilation shaft on the east side of the tunnel network. It was narrow and partially caved in, but she was small. She tied the medkit to her back, told Bray she would be back before morning, and crawled into the dark. Bray grabbed her sleeve. "Nor, do not do this. Somebody has to, then let somebody bigger do it. Somebody bigger will not fit through that shaft." She pulled free and disappeared into the gap. The shaft was tight and dusty, and she had to drag herself on her elbows for what felt like an hour. Twice she thought she was stuck. Twice she was not. She came out through a cracked vent cover behind the colony's water recycling building. The surface was unrecognizable. The Dravani had torn apart most of the structures. Prefab walls had been ripped down for materials. Heavy alien machinery sat where homes used to be. Patrol groups of Dravani soldiers moved in pairs, their massive forms casting long shadows under portable floodlights. They had not destroyed the colony out of cruelty. They had simply repurposed it, as if the humans who built it were an afterthought. Nor moved in the dark spaces between the lights. She was small and quiet, and she knew this colony better than anyone alive. She reached the clinic in 20 minutes. The emergency locker was untouched. The Dravani had no use for human medicine. She filled her bag and the medkit with everything she could carry. On her way back, she took a longer route to avoid a patrol. That route brought her past the eastern ravine, a shallow canyon that ran along the colony's edge. She heard something, a low, wet, rasping sound, breathing but wrong, broken. She looked down into the ravine. A Dravani shuttle lay, crumpled at the bottom. It had hit the canyon wall during landing, maybe caught by a dust storm or debris. The hull was split open. Smoke still drifted from one engine. Inside, half buried under a collapsed support beam, was a Dravani soldier. He was enormous even by their standards. His gray-green scales were slick with dark blood. A deep gash ran across his torso from his left shoulder to his lower right side. 2 of his 4 arms were pinned. His breathing came in short, wet gasps. His eyes were half open, glowing a faint amber, and they were unfocused. He was dying. Nurse stood at the edge of the ravine and did not move for a long time. This was the enemy. His people had taken her home. They had forced her community underground like animals. Every reasonable thought in her head told her to walk away. Let the desert finish what the crash had started. She climbed down into the ravine. She did not think about it. Her hands moved before her mind caught up, the same way they always did. She opened the medkit and knelt beside him. His scales were hot to the touch. His blood was darker than human blood, almost black, and it smelled like iron and something chemical she could not name. The wound was bad. She could not stitch it properly because the anatomy was wrong and the tissue was too thick. But a wound was a wound. Bleeding was bleeding. She cleaned it with antiseptic. She packed it with gauze. She wrapped it as tight as she could, using almost every bandage she had just collected. The Dravani's eyes focused on her. He tried to snarl. The sound came out as a weak rumble. One free arm twitched toward her. "Hold still," nurse said, "or the bandage will not set." He stared at her. She stared back. Then she kept working. She stayed through the night. The desert got cold after dark, and his body temperature was dropping. She took off her jacket and laid it over his chest. It covered almost nothing on his massive frame, but it was what she had. She kept pressure on the wound when the bleeding tried to start again. She talked to him sometimes, not because he could understand her, but because her mother always said that a voice was the last thing a dying person should hear. Near dawn, his breathing steadied. The bleeding stopped. His eyes opened fully and looked at her with an expression she could not read. He spoke one word in a language she did not know. Nor packed the medkit. She was out of bandages now. She had given an alien enemy every supply she had risked her life to collect. She did not feel angry about it. She did not feel anything she could explain. She climbed out of the ravine and slipped back into the ventilation shaft before the sun came up. Behind her, in the wreckage, Rennick, Supreme Commander of the Ninth Conquest Fleet, lay alive because a human child had decided he was worth saving. Rennick had been carried out of many battles before, but never from a ditch and never wrapped in human bandages that smelled like copper dust and antiseptic. His soldiers found him at dawn. 4 of them lifted the beam off his pinned arms and carried him to the command ship on a field stretcher. By the time he reached the medical bay, the ship's surgeon had already been screaming into a communicator for an hour, demanding to know how the Supreme Commander of the Ninth Fleet had gone missing without a single officer noticing. Finara was waiting when they brought him in. She stood at the entrance of the medical bay with her arms crossed, all 4 of them, and her amber eyes burning. She was tall even for Dravani, lean and sharp-scaled, and she wore her rank like a weapon. "Where were you?" she said. "My shuttle went down in the eastern ravine," Rennick replied. His voice was rough. The surgeon was already cutting away the human bandages to inspect the wound beneath. "Debris strike during descent. You were missing for 9 hours. I had search teams ready to deploy. I survived, clearly, but this dressing." The surgeon held up the gauze, stained dark with Dravani blood. "This is not our work. This is human medical material." Finara's eyes narrowed. Rennick said nothing. On the surface, the conquest continued. Dravani engineering teams finished converting the colony's structures into forward supply stations. Patrol routes were expanded. The mining tunnels had been located on sensor maps, and Finara ordered a methodical sweep to flush the humans out. They came in through 3 tunnel entrances at once. There was no fight. Hadley knew that resistance would mean death, and he was not willing to spend lives on pride. The humans walked out with their hands visible, blinking in the harsh floodlights. Families held together. Children pressed against their parents. Nur walked out beside Bray, the empty medkit on her back. They were taken to a holding area near the Dravani command post. It was an open-air pen surrounded by energy barriers, just big enough for the colony's population. Not cruel, but not kind. The Dravani gave them water and protein rations. They did not give them shade or blankets, nor sat in the dirt and watched the alien soldiers move around them. She was tired. She had not slept in 2 days. Bray sat next to her, his knees pulled to his chest. "What did you do with the supplies?" he asked quietly. "Use them," Nurse said. "On who?" Nur did not answer. On the 2nd day, in the holding area, the Supreme Commander came. He walked through the camp in full ceremonial armor. It was dark metal, etched with symbols Nur did not recognize, and it covered most of his body but not all. She could see the gaps at his torso where the plates did not fully close, and beneath those gaps she saw the edge of scar. Fresh, puckered, exactly where she had packed the wound. Rennick moved slowly through the rows of captured humans. His officers walked behind him. Finara walked closest, scanning the crowd with open contempt. The humans shrank back as the commander passed. He was the largest Dravani most of them had ever seen. He stopped. Nora looked up. Their eyes met. She recognized the wound. He recognized the hands. Neither of them spoke. Nora's heart hammered, but she kept her face still. Rennick's amber eyes held on her for 3 full seconds, which in the middle of a conquered colony felt like an hour. Then he turned and walked away. Fenara glanced at Nor, then at Rennick's back, and her expression shifted to something suspicious. That night, in his command chamber aboard the fleet's capital ship, Rennick sat alone. The lights were dimmed. The holographic display in front of him showed not battle plans or fleet positions, but text. Ancient text. The legal codex of the Dravani Dominion, specifically the section known as the Onvora. The Onvora was not a suggestion. It was the oldest law in Dravani civilization, older than the Dominion itself. It governed 3 things: honor in combat, debts between warriors, and the sacred obligation of a life debt. A life debt was simple. If a being saved your life, you owed them. Not gratitude, not a favor. Everything. Your strength, your obedience, your protection. Until the debt was repaid in full or your heart stopped beating. The law did not care about species. It did not care about rank. It did not ask whether the one who saved you was your ally or your enemy. It only asked one question. Were you saved? Rennick had been saved. By a human child. With a medkit too big for her. On a planet he was in the middle of conquering. He closed the codex and sat in the dark. 2 days later, Fenara came to him with a report from the ship's medical team. They had analyzed the field dressing removed from his wound. The materials were human. The technique was crude but effective. Whoever had done it had no training in Dravani anatomy, but had improvised with remarkable precision. A human treated you, Fenara said. It was not a question. Yes. Which one? Rennick did not answer. Commander, the Onvora cannot apply here. Humans are not part of our civilization. They are not covered by our codes. Rennick looked at her. Read the law again, Fenara. It does not say civilized. It does not say Dravani. It does not say worthy. He paused. It says life. Someone held mine when it was leaving. That is all the law requires. Fenara stared at him. Then she turned and left without another word. Rennick remained in the dark chamber and thought about a girl who sat in a ravine all night, pressing human bandages against alien blood, because she could not bring herself to let something die. He did not understand it. But the Onvora did not require understanding. It required only truth. The sun had not yet risen over Dusthaven when the Dravani soldiers marched the humans out of the holding area and lined them up in the open ground before the command post. Nur stood near the middle of the crowd. Beret was to her left. Her father was somewhere behind her. Hadley stood at the front, his back straight, and his face empty the way soldiers make their faces when they know something terrible is about to happen. A raised platform had been built overnight from colony wreckage. It was crude but tall, high enough for whoever stood on it to be seen by every human and every Dravani in the area. Soldiers of the Ninth Fleet stood in formation on both sides. Thousands of them, their armor dark and their weapons glowing faintly in the early light. The air was cold and still. Rennick climbed the platform. He was in full ceremonial armor. His 4 arms hung at his sides. His scarred scales caught the first edge of sunrise. He looked out over the crowd, human and Dravani both, and when he spoke his voice was amplified so that it reached every ear. This world is claimed by the Dravani Dominion under the authority of the Ninth Conquest Fleet. The human population will be relocated to a designated holding world. Structures and resources are now Dominion property. This is standard protocol. Fenara stood behind him, her expression satisfied. The humans in the crowd sagged. Some of the women pulled their children closer. Hadley's jaw tightened, but he did not speak. Then Rennick stopped. He stood silent on the platform for a long moment, looking out over the crowd as if searching for something. Then he stepped down, not to the side, down, off the platform, onto the ground, and he walked forward into the space between the Dravani lines and the human crowd, directly toward Nor. The crowd shifted. People stepped aside without knowing why, creating a narrow path. Rennick walked through it, his massive body towering over every human he passed. His eyes were fixed ahead. Finara watched from the platform, her expression changing from satisfaction to confusion to alarm. He stopped in front of Noor. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The medkit hung from her shoulder. Her hands were dusty. She was the smallest person in the crowd, and he was the largest being on the planet, and the distance between them was less than an arm's length. Then the Supreme Commander of the Ninth Conquest Fleet knelt. All four of his arms pressed flat against the ground. His forehead touched the red dirt of Dust Haven. He knelt the way Dravani knelt only for the sacred, the way they knelt only when the Envora demanded it, and the sound of his armored knees hitting the ground was loud enough to echo off the ruined buildings. He spoke in Dravani first. The words were old and formal and carried a weight that every Dravani soldier recognized instantly. Then he spoke again in halting, careful human language. You held my life when it was leaving. I return it to your keeping. What you ask, I give. What you need, I am, until the debt is paid or my heart stops. Nobody moved. The Dravani soldiers stared. Several of them lowered their weapons without meaning to. A few dropped to one knee reflexively before catching themselves. Finara stood on the platform with her mouth open, unable to speak, because to challenge the Envora in public was to dishonor herself and every ancestor who ever lived. The humans understood none of the formal words, but they understood the image. The largest and most powerful alien on the planet was on his knees before a 14-year-old girl. Hadley understood more than the rest. He had served alongside alien species during his military years. He knew enough about the Dravani to recognize the Envora when he saw it. His face went white. My God, he whispered. He just gave himself to her. Nur looked down at Rennick. His forehead was still pressed to the dirt. His breathing was steady. He was not shaking. This was not fear. This was devotion to a law older than his entire fleet. She did not know what to say. She did not know what any of this meant. She only knew that 3 nights ago she had sat in a ravine and held bandages against a dying alien's chest because she could not bring herself to leave. I did not save you, so you would owe me, she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence it carried. I saved you because you were hurt. Rennick looked up. His amber eyes met hers. And for the first time in a life built on conquest and command and the absolute certainty that strength was everything, the Supreme Commander of the Dravani Ninth Fleet did not know how to respond. He had conquered 12 worlds. He had broken armies and bent civilizations. He had never once been defeated in battle. But a girl with a medkit and no agenda had walked into a ravine, knelt beside the enemy, and held his life together with gauze and stubbornness. Not for power, not for leverage, not for anything, because he was hurt. That was her reason, the whole reason. Rennick stayed on his knees. The wind blew red, dust across the ground between them. 4,000 humans watched. Thousands of Dravani soldiers watched. And something shifted in the air that morning, something that none of them could name, but all of them could feel. The war had not ended. The fleet had not left. But something had cracked open in the space between two species, and what came through that crack was something the Dravani had never encountered in all their centuries of conquest. It was mercy, and it did not ask for anything in return. By nightfall, every Dravani on Dust Haven and in orbit above it had heard what their Supreme Commander had done. The reaction split the fleet like a blade through wood. Half the soldiers accepted it immediately. The Envora was sacred. If the commander declared a life debt, it was real and it was final. These soldiers had been raised on the code. They did not question it any more than they questioned gravity. The other half followed Finara. She paced the bridge of the command ship with a fury that made the bridge officers lean away from her path. She had already sent a coded transmission to Dominion High Command, reporting that Supreme Commander Rennick had been compromised. A human, she wrote. A child. She used the word contaminated. High Command responded within hours. The message was brief. The Envora is Dominion law. If the commander declared a life debt, the declaration stands. However, if the situation interferes with the campaign, a replacement fleet will be dispatched and Rennick will be recalled for review. Finara read the message 3 times. It was not the answer she wanted, But it was not a rejection either. If she could prove the life debt was weakening the mission, she could have Rennick removed. She just needed the girl to make a demand that crossed a line. She went to the holding area. The humans had been given slightly better conditions since the morning. Not freedom, but blankets and shade covers. Hadley had organized the colony into work shifts to keep people occupied. Nur was sitting apart from the others, cross-legged in the dirt, reorganizing the medkit she had emptied 3 nights ago. It was a habit. She sorted the empty pouches and rolled the remaining strips of tape as if she were preparing for something. Finara walked through the energy barrier and stopped in front of her. 2 guards flanked her. Every human nearby went still. "You," Finara said. Her human language was better than Rennick's. Sharper. "You are the one who touched the commander." Nur looked up. "I bandaged his wound. You created a debt that now threatens my fleet's mission. Do you understand what you have done? I stopped someone from bleeding to death." Finara crouched so that her face was level with Nur's. Her amber eyes were cold. "Release him from the debt. Say the words. Tell him you want nothing and the Envora is satisfied. Do this, and your people will be treated well during relocation. And if I do not, then I will find a way to remove you from the equation that does not violate the code. The Envora protects you while the debt is active, but there are edges to every law." Nur held her gaze. She was frightened. She did not pretend otherwise. But something in her, the same thing that had made her climb into that ravine, the same thing that made her wrap bandages around an enemy, would not bend. "I never asked for any debt," Nur said. "I did not want power over anyone." Finara stared at her for a long time. Then she stood and left without another word. She could not understand it. In Dravani culture, power was the only currency that mattered. A being who held a life debt over a supreme commander held more leverage than most planetary governors. To not use, it was either madness or deception, and Finara could not tell which. 2 days passed. The fleet remained in position. The conquest was stalled, but not canceled. Tensions grew on both sides. Then Nur went to Rennick. She found him standing outside the command post at dusk, looking up at the sky the way she often did. He turned when she approached. His guards moved to intercept her, but he waved them away. "If I ask you something," Nur said, "you have to do it. That is what the debt means." "Yes." "Is there a limit?" "No." Nur took a breath. "Then do not hurt my people. Do not take our home. Let us stay on Dust Haven." Rennick looked at her for a long time. The wind moved the dust between them. "You could ask for anything," he said. "Wealth, a ship, safe passage to Earth, protection for your lifetime. You could ask for things that would make you powerful beyond your understanding. I am asking for my home." He nodded slowly. The next morning, Rennick stood before the assembled fleet. Every soldier on the surface and every crew member watching from the ships in orbit saw him on the raised platform. Finara stood behind him again, but this time her face was stone. "The debt holder has spoken," Rennick said. His voice carried across the formation. "Under the Envora, her request is her right. The conquest of Dust Haven is suspended. The human colony will remain. All Dravani forces will withdraw to orbital positions." The silence that followed was enormous. Then Rennick knelt, the same way he had knelt before Nur. Forehead to the ground, forearms flat, and one by one, the soldiers followed. It started with the officers closest to him. Then it spread outward through the ranks like a wave. Row after row of Dravani warriors, each one dropping to their knees, pressing their arms to the dirt of a world they had come to conquer. Not in defeat, not in submission, in acknowledgement of a law that was older than any of them, honored by a girl who did not even know its name. Finara was the last. She stood rigid for nearly a full minute while every eye watched her. Then she knelt. Her jaw was clenched, so tight the scales on her neck stood rigid. But she knelt. Nur watched from the edge of the crowd, standing between Bray and her father. She did not feel powerful. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired and confused and impossibly small. But her people were staying, and the army was on its knees. That was enough. The first rain on Dust Haven in 3 months fell on a Tuesday, and Nur stood in it with her face turned up and her eyes closed like she was trying to memorize the feeling. 3 months had passed since the army knelt. The Dravani fleet still hung in orbit, a ring of dark warships visible at night like a second set of stars. But on the ground, things had changed in ways nobody expected. The colony was rebuilding, not just with human hands. Rennick had stationed a small Dravani detail on the surface, officially to monitor the settlement, but the monitoring had quietly turned into something else. Dravani engineers helped reconstruct the grain storage building and made it stronger than the original. Dravani soldiers, uncomfortable and confused, carried water tanks that would have taken 10 humans to lift. They did not smile because Dravani did not smile, but they showed up every morning and they worked. The humans did not trust them. Not fully. Maybe not ever. But they worked beside them. And sometimes Bray would trade a Dravani soldier a piece of dried fruit for a tool, and neither of them would talk about it afterward. Nor visited Rennick every few days. They met outside the command post, usually at dusk when the heat broke. Their conversations were awkward. He spoke in short, careful sentences. She asked questions that made him go quiet for long stretches. "How many worlds have you taken?" she asked one evening. 12. "What happened to the people on them?" He did not answer for a while. They were relocated. Were they given a choice? No. Do you think about them? Another silence. Longer this time. I did not used to. She did not push him. She never pushed. But she kept coming back. And he kept answering, and each conversation stripped away one more layer of the armor that was not made of metal. He told her about the Dravani homeworld, a planet of red storms and deep canyons where strength was the only language that mattered. He told her about his training, which began when he was younger than she was now. He told her about his first command and his first conquest, and how the silence after a battle was the loneliest sound in the universe. She told him about her mother, about the fever that took her, about the medkit and why she carried it, about the goat that would not stop pulling at its bandages. "You saved an animal that does not understand what you did for it," Rennick said. "That is not why you help something," Nor replied. "You do not help something so it will understand. You help it because it needs help." He looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was speaking a language he was only beginning to learn. Finara left Dust Haven 6 weeks after the army knelt. High Command reassigned her to a border fleet, far from the colony and far from Rennick. Before she boarded her shuttle, she walked to where Nor was patching a fence near the goat pen. She stood there for a moment, rigid and proud, her 4 arms folded tight. "You are the strangest enemy I have ever failed to defeat," Finara said. Nor looked at her. "I was never your enemy." Finara's jaw tightened. She turned and walked away. She did not look back, but she did not argue either, and for Finara, that was as close to agreement as she would ever come. Word of what happened on Dust Haven spread through the galaxy the way all impossible stories spread, fast and twisted. Other species heard that a human child had stopped a Dravani conquest. Some versions said she was a warrior who defeated the commander in single combat. Some said she had a weapon that brought the fleet to its knees. Some said she was a diplomat sent by Earth government. The truth was quieter than all of them and more powerful. A girl with a medkit had bandaged a wound because she could not watch something bleed to death. That was the whole story. Earth's diplomatic corps arrived 2 months later. They used the Dust Haven incident as a foundation for the first formal negotiations between humanity and the Dravani Dominion. For the first time in Dravani history, they agreed to sit across a table from another species instead of standing over them. The diplomats asked Nor to attend. She said no. She had fences to fix. On a warm evening near the end of the 3rd month, Nor knelt in the red dirt beside the old goat. Its leg had healed badly, and it still limped. She rewrapped the bandage the way she always did, gently and with more patience than the goat deserved. A shadow fell over her. She did not look up. Rennick stood a few paces behind her. He had learned to walk more quietly around humans. His human language had improved until he barely paused between words anymore. "You never did tell me," he said, "why you saved me that night." Nor finished the bandage. She patted the goat on its side and stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. She looked at him, this enormous alien commander who had conquered 12 worlds, who commanded thousands of warriors, who had knelt before her in front of his entire army. "Because you were bleeding," she said. That is the only reason anyone should ever need. Rennick looked at her. The wind moved between them, carrying the red dust of Dust Haven across the ground. Behind them, human children chased each other between rebuilt homes while Dravani soldiers pretended not to watch. Above them, the fleet waited in orbit, going nowhere. He nodded slowly. He still did not fully understand. But standing in the dirt of a world he had come to conquer and chose to leave, watching a girl care for a limping goat with the same hands that had held his life together, he was beginning to. And that beginning was enough.